There are places on Earth where humans were never meant to go. Places that exist in permanent darkness, where the rules of the surface world don't apply. Where things have evolved in isolation for so long, they've become something else entirely. The cave systems beneath Virginia's Appalachian Mountains run for hundreds of miles, most of them unmapped, unexplored, unknown. And there's a reason for that. The old-timers in these mountains know which caves are safe and which ones aren't. They know which openings to avoid, which passages lead to places you don't come back from. They know about the crawlers. Small, pale, humanoid things that live in the deepest tunnels, that hunt in absolute darkness, that can smell fear and hear a heartbeat from 100 yards away. This is the story of Derek Hanson, an experienced cave explorer who thought he knew what he was doing, who thought he'd seen everything caves had to offer. He was wrong, and by the time he realized what was hunting him in the darkness of Blackthorne Cave, it was already far, far too late. Welcome to the deep places. The crawlers are waiting. Derek Hanson had been exploring caves for 15 years, and he'd never encountered anything he couldn't handle. He'd squeezed through passages barely wider than his shoulders, rappelled down vertical shafts hundreds of feet deep, and navigated underwater sections that required holding his breath for minutes at a time. He'd explored caves in Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, and throughout the Appalachian Range. Caving was his passion, his obsession, and through his popular YouTube channel documenting his explorations, his career. So when he found references to Blackthorne Cave in an 1847 surveyor's journal at the Virginia Historical Society, Derek knew he'd stumbled onto something special. The journal described a vast cavern system of unknown depth located in the mountains of southwest Virginia, near the border with Kentucky. But what made it truly interesting was what the surveyor had written. We attempted to map the cave, but were forced to retreat after penetrating only 400 yards. The passages descend at alarming angles, and the air grows foul in the deeper sections. More troubling were the sounds we heard, clicking and scraping echoes that seemed to come from all directions. Our guide, a local man named Josiah Blackthorne, refused to continue. He claimed the cave was cursed, that things lived in the deep places that would take a man's mind before taking his life. We thought him superstitious, but his fear was genuine. 2 days after our expedition, Blackthorne disappeared. His family found his clothing near the cave entrance, neatly folded, but no trace of the man himself. Derek had tried to find modern references to Blackthorne Cave, but came up empty. It wasn't listed in any caving registries, wasn't marked on geological surveys, and didn't appear on any maps. It was as if the cave had been deliberately forgotten, which made it perfect for Derek's purposes. An unmapped cave system would be a major discovery, the kind of content his viewers loved. He spent 2 weeks researching the location, cross-referencing the surveyor's notes with modern topographical maps. Finally, he identified what he believed was the cave's location, a remote area of national forest land, miles from any trail, accessible only by a difficult hike through dense mountain forest. Derek told his girlfriend Maya where he was going and when to expect him back. Standard practice for solo caving expeditions. He packed his gear, helmet with LED lamp and backup lights, rope, climbing harness, first aid kit, emergency beacon, food and water for 2 days, and his GoPro cameras. He'd document everything, create an epic multi-part series about discovering a lost cave system. The hike took 6 hours. Derek found the cave entrance exactly where he'd calculated it would be, a narrow opening in a cliff face, partially hidden by overhanging rock and thick vegetation. Someone had clearly tried to conceal it. Derek had to clear away deliberately placed stones and branches to access the entrance. Standing at the opening, Derek felt a strange hesitation. The air coming from the cave was cold and had an odd smell, not the usual mineral scent of limestone caves, but something organic and unpleasant, like meat that had started to rot. And the darkness inside was absolute, seeming to swallow his flashlight beam. Derek shook off the feeling. He'd explored hundreds of caves, and they all had their quirks. He checked his equipment one more time, activated his helmet cam, and squeezed through the entrance. "All right, folks," he said to the camera, his voice echoing slightly. "We're entering what I believe is Blackthorne Cave, unmapped since 1847. Let's see what we find." The entrance passage was tight, requiring Derek to crawl on his belly for about 20 feet before it opened into a larger chamber. He stood, playing his headlamp around the space. The chamber was roughly circular, about 30 feet across, with several passages leading off in different directions. The walls were wet with condensation, and the floor was covered in fine, pale sediment that showed no footprints or disturbance. No one had been here in a very long time. Derek chose the largest passage and began his descent. The tunnel sloped downward at a steep angle, and he had to brace himself against the walls to avoid sliding. His headlamp illuminated smooth limestone walls marked with unusual formations, not the typical stalactites and stalagmites, but strange organic-looking protrusions that almost resembled bones. "The geology here is really unusual," Derek narrated for his camera. "I've never seen formations quite like these. They almost look deliberately shaped." The passage descended for what Derek estimated was several hundred feet before leveling out into another chamber. This one was larger, maybe 50 feet across, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above him. And the smell was stronger here, that rotting meat odor mixed with something else, something chemical and sharp. Derek's light swept across the chamber floor and stopped. There were bones, lots of them. Scattered across the sediment were the skeletal remains of animals, deer, raccoons, possums, and others Derek couldn't immediately identify. All of them had been picked clean, and many showed marks that looked like teeth scrapes. "So something's been using this chamber as a feeding ground," Derek said, his voice less confident now. "Probably a bear den or something?" But Derek knew enough about caves to recognize that bears didn't typically drag their kills this deep underground, and the sheer number of bones suggested something had been feeding here for a long time. He should have turned back then. Every instinct he'd developed over 15 years of caving was telling him to retreat, but Derek's curiosity and professional pride overrode his instincts. He'd come too far to turn back without exploring further. Beyond the bone chamber, the passage split into 3 tunnels. Derek chose the middle one, marking his route with reflective tape as he went, standard practice to ensure he could find his way back. The tunnel was narrower here, forcing him to crouch, and the walls were no longer smooth limestone, but rough, jagged rock that snagged at his clothing. He'd been underground for maybe 2 hours when he heard the first sound. It came from somewhere ahead. A clicking noise, rapid and rhythmic, like someone rapidly tapping their fingernails against stone. Derek stopped, listening. The sound echoed strangely in the confined space, making it impossible to determine distance or direction. "Hello?" Derek called out. His voice echoed away into the darkness, and the clicking stopped. In the silence that followed, Derek became aware of how isolated he was. Miles of rock separated him from the surface. No one knew exactly where this cave was. If something happened, if he got trapped or injured, no one would find him. The clicking started again, but now it was behind him. Derek spun, his headlamp sweeping across the tunnel. Nothing, just empty passage and his reflective trail markers gleaming in the light. But he was certain the sound had been closer that time, as if whatever was making it had moved while he was facing the other direction. "Probably just water dripping," Derek said, his voice betraying his nervousness. "Sound travels weird in caves." But he knew it hadn't been water dripping. It had been something else, something deliberate. Derek continued forward, but now he was moving faster, less interested in thorough exploration and more focused on mapping the basic layout so he could return with a team. The tunnel began to descend again, more steeply this time, and Derek had to use his rope to safely navigate the slope. At the bottom, he found himself in the largest chamber yet, a cavern so vast his headlamp couldn't reach the far walls or ceiling. The floor was covered in that same pale sediment, but here it was churned and disturbed, as if many things had been moving through recently. And the smell was overwhelming, making Derek gag. He took 3 steps into the chamber and froze. There were dozens of tunnel openings in the walls around him at various heights, like a honeycomb, and from several of those openings he could see reflected light, the faint gleam of eyes catching his headlamp beam. Derek's breath caught in his throat. The eyes weren't animal eyes. They were too large, too forward-facing, positioned where human eyes would be on a human face. But they reflected light like animal eyes, gleaming pale green in his lamp's beam. And there were many of them, at least a dozen pairs, watching him from different tunnels. "What the hell?" Derek whispered. The clicking started again, but now it was coming from all around him, from every tunnel, a chorus of rapid clicking that echoed and overlapped until it was almost deafening. And the eyes began to move, emerging from the tunnels, descending toward the chamber floor. Derek's headlamp caught his first clear view of one of the creatures, and his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. It was roughly humanoid, 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, a head, but everything about it was wrong. It was small, maybe 4 feet tall, with limbs that were too long and jointed wrong, ending in hands and feet that had too many fingers and toes. The skin was pale, almost translucent, showing dark veins beneath. And the face? God, the face. It had eyes, nose, and mouth where they should be, but the proportions were all wrong. The eyes were huge and lidless, adapted for seeing in total darkness. The nose was just slits, and the mouth was too wide, extending almost to where ears should be, filled with small, sharp teeth designed for tearing flesh. The creature cocked its head, studying Derek with an intelligence that was deeply unsettling. Then it opened its mouth and made that clicking sound, not with its tongue, but with its teeth, rapidly chattering them together. All the other creatures answered with their own clicking, and Derek realized with horror that they were communicating. These weren't animals, they were intelligent, coordinating, hunting together. "Oh shit," Derek breathed. He took a step backward, and every creature in the chamber tensed, ready to spring. Derek ran. He bolted for the passage he'd entered from, his headlamp beam bouncing wildly. Behind him, he heard a sound like water rushing, but it wasn't water, it was the creatures, dozens of them, pursuing him with a speed that no human could match in this terrain. The tunnel was too narrow for Derek to run properly. He had to scramble on all fours, scraping his hands and knees on the rough stone. His headlamp showed his reflective markers ahead, guiding him back toward the entrance. But the creatures were so close he could hear their breathing, wet, rasping sounds, and that constant clicking. One of them grabbed his ankle. Derek screamed and kicked, his boot connecting with something solid. The creature shrieked, a sound so high-pitched it hurt Derek's ears, and released him. He scrambled forward, the adrenaline overriding the pain from his scraped limbs. He reached the steep slope he'd descended earlier and started climbing. The rope he'd left in place was still there, and he used it to haul himself up, his muscles burning. Below him, he could see multiple creatures ascending the slope with terrifying ease, their many-jointed limbs perfectly adapted for climbing. Derek reached the top of the slope and kept running. The bone chamber was ahead. He could see the piles of skeletal remains in his bouncing headlamp beam. He was going to make it. He had to make it. Something landed on his back. The creature was small, but incredibly strong. Derek felt its fingers, or whatever they were, digging into his shoulders, and then teeth scraped against the back of his neck, biting through his jacket. Derek threw himself backward, slamming the creature against the tunnel wall. It shrieked and fell off, but 2 more immediately took its place. Derek swung his helmet, the hard plastic connecting with pale flesh. He grabbed one of the creatures and threw it as hard as he could down the tunnel. But there were too many, and they were too fast. He felt hands grabbing at his legs, his arms, his equipment. One of them tore away his helmet, taking his primary light source with it. In the sudden darkness, Derek fumbled for his backup light, his hands shaking. The creatures were all around him now. He could feel them, hear their clicking communication, smell their awful breath. They were coordinating, working together to bring him down. Derek's backup light clicked on, a weaker beam than his helmet lamp, but enough to see. The creatures recoiled from the light, shrieking and covering their oversized eyes. They'd adapted to total darkness. Bright light hurt them. Derek used the moment to run. He crashed through the bone chamber, kicking up ancient remains, and dove into the passage that led toward the entrance. The creatures pursued, but more cautiously now, staying just beyond the reach of his light. They were hurting him, Derek realized, driving him towards something. But he had no choice except to keep moving forward. The entrance chamber was ahead. Derek could see it in his light beam, could see the narrow crawlway that led to the surface. Freedom was 20 feet away. But blocking the crawlway was the largest creature Derek had seen, easily 6 feet tall, much bigger than the others. It was older, too, its translucent skin covered in scars, and when it opened its mouth, Derek saw that it had more teeth than the others, multiple rows like a shark. This was the leader, the Alpha, and it had been waiting for him. The smaller creatures stopped pursuing, forming a semicircle behind Derek. He was trapped between them and the Alpha. The clicking intensified. Derek realized they were excited, anticipating the kill. "Come on!" Derek shouted, shining his light directly at the Alpha's face. "Come on!" The Alpha shrieked but didn't retreat like the others. Instead, it lunged forward with impossible speed. Derek swung his light like a club, the metal flashlight connecting with the creature's skull with a satisfying crack. The Alpha stumbled, and Derek didn't hesitate. He charged forward, shoving past the creature's flailing limbs and diving into the crawlway. Behind him, the creatures shrieked in fury. Derek felt hands grabbing at his boots, but he kicked frantically, crawling forward with every ounce of strength he had left. The crawlway was too narrow for the larger Alpha, but the smaller creatures were trying to follow, their thin bodies squeezing through the confined space. Derek's hands found the cave entrance, felt the brush he'd cleared away. He pulled himself through, emerging into daylight so bright it was blinding after hours in the darkness. He rolled away from the entrance and looked back. Pale hands were reaching out from the cave entrance, fingers grasping at empty air. But the creatures couldn't come out. The light-sensitive eyes were too intense for their light-sensitive eyes. They shrieked and retreated back into the darkness, the clicking fading as they withdrew deeper into the cave. Derek lay on the ground, gasping, his body shaking uncontrollably. His clothes were torn, he was bleeding from multiple scrapes and bites, and his equipment was mostly gone. But he was alive. He checked his watch. He'd been underground for 6 hours. It felt like days. Derek made his way back to his car on unsteady legs, his mind reeling. What had he found down there? Some kind of undiscovered species? An evolutionary offshoot of humanity that had adapted to subterranean life? The creatures had shown clear intelligence, communication, coordinated hunting behavior. They were more than just animals. And they were still down there, in unmapped tunnels that extended who knew how far beneath the mountains. Derek drove straight to the hospital, where doctors treated his wounds and noted his story with barely concealed skepticism. Animal attack, they concluded, probably a pack of aggressive raccoons or feral dogs that had denned in the cave. Derek didn't correct them. Who would believe the truth? He contacted the Virginia Department of Conservation, reported the cave's location, and recommended it be sealed. The official who took his report seemed unsurprised. "Blackthorne Cave," the man said, checking his records. "Yeah, we've got notes on that one going back to the 1800s. Multiple incidents of people going in and either not coming out or coming out traumatized. We don't actively seal caves without documented fatalities, but we do maintain an informal list of caves we recommend against exploring. Blackthorne's been on that list for over a century. Why isn't it marked? Why isn't there signage warning people away?" Because official warnings draw attention, curious people seek out forbidden places. We've found it's better to let certain caves remain forgotten. Most locals know which ones to avoid. There are creatures in there, multiple individuals of some kind of, I don't know what. They're intelligent, they hunt in packs, and they're extremely dangerous. The official's expression was carefully neutral. I'm sure your experience was very frightening, Mr. Hanson. Cave exploration can be disorienting, especially in unfamiliar systems. The mind can play tricks in the darkness. He didn't believe Derek. No one would. Derek realized that if he wanted to be taken seriously, he'd need evidence. Video footage, photographs, something concrete. He checked his GoPro cameras. The helmet cam had been torn away by the creatures, lost somewhere in the depths. But his backup chest-mounted camera was still there, battered but functional. Derek reviewed the footage that night in his hotel room. The first hour was standard caving footage, tight passages, interesting formations, professional narration. Then came the bone chamber, and Derek saw his own face on camera as he realized something was wrong. The footage showed the passage split, his decision to continue deeper. And then at the 2-hour mark, the clicking started. On camera, it was clearly audible, clearly not water dripping. Derek watched himself spin around, trying to locate the source. The camera didn't catch the creatures in the first chamber. They'd stayed in the shadows beyond the reach of his light. But the footage from the large cavern was clear, the eye shine reflecting from multiple tunnel openings, the creatures emerging, descending toward him. The camera had captured several of them in perfect detail, their disturbing anatomy, their coordinated movements, their obvious intelligence. Derek watched himself run, watched the creatures pursue. The footage was shaky and chaotic, but unmistakable. Whatever those things were, they were real. They were down there, and he had proof. He uploaded the footage to his computer and started editing. This would be the most important video he'd ever release. Evidence of a completely unknown species, possibly even a new branch of hominid evolution. The scientific community would have to take notice. But as Derek worked on the edit, he noticed something disturbing. In several frames, when the creatures were at the edge of his light range, they seemed to be watching the camera specifically, not just looking at Derek, but at the camera itself, as if they understood what it was, what it meant. In one frame, captured just before Derek lost his helmet cam, a creature was staring directly into the lens, and if Derek looked closely, very closely, he could swear the thing was smiling. Derek stopped editing. A thought occurred to him, cold and terrifying. What if the creatures had let him escape? What if they'd allowed him to take footage, to have proof, specifically so that others would come looking for Blackthorne Cave? What if he'd just done exactly what they wanted? Derek deleted the footage, all of it, the raw files, the backups, everything. Then he took his damaged equipment, his cameras, his GPS with the cave's coordinates, and destroyed them completely. He would never speak about Blackthorne Cave again, would never guide anyone to its location, would never give those things in the darkness what they might want, more humans venturing into their domain. Some caves, Derek understood now, were unmapped for a reason. Some darkness was meant to stay undisturbed. 6 months later, Derek had quit caving entirely. He'd taken a normal job, moved to a city, tried to rebuild his life. The nightmares had mostly stopped, and he'd started to feel like himself again. Then he received a package at his apartment. No return address, just his name and address written in a spidery, uneven hand. Inside was his helmet camera, the one the creatures had torn from his head, the one he'd assumed was lost forever in the depths of Blackthorne Cave. And taped to it was a note, written in that same disturbing handwriting. "Thank you for visiting. Come back soon. Bring friends." Derek never opened the camera, never checked if the memory card was still inside, if it contained footage of what happened after it was torn from his head. He threw the entire package away. But sometimes, late at night, he wonders what he'd see if he watched that footage. wonders what the creatures did with his camera after they took it, wonders if they're still down there in the darkness of Blackthorne Cave, clicking to each other, waiting for the next explorer, the next person who thinks they know what they're doing, the next human who ventures too deep into places they were never meant to go. The crawlers are patient. They've been in those caves for thousands of years, maybe longer. They can wait a little longer. After all, people are always curious about unmapped caves, about hidden places, about what might be lurking in the darkness beneath the mountains. And sooner or later, someone else will find Blackthorne Cave. Someone else will squeeze through that entrance, descend into the bone chamber, venture into the vast cavern with its honeycomb of tunnels. Someone else will hear the clicking, and the crawlers will be ready. Derek Hanson lives in Seattle now, as far from the Appalachian Mountains as he could get without leaving the continental U.S. He works in IT, has a normal life, and never talks about his caving days. But 3 weeks ago, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A YouTube video titled, "Exploring Virginia's Most Dangerous Cave." The thumbnail showed a young explorer standing at a cave entrance, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. Derek recognized that entrance immediately. Someone had found Blackthorne Cave. He tried to comment on the video, tried to warn them, but his comments were automatically deleted. The video's creator had disabled warnings from certain keywords, probably tired of people telling him to be careful. The video was posted 4 days ago. The creator hasn't posted anything since. His last comment 3 days ago said he was going back for a deeper exploration. No one's heard from him since. Derek knows he should contact authorities, should try to help, but he also knows what happens to people who go into Blackthorne Cave, and he knows that the crawlers now have fresh prey. Maybe, if he's very lucky, they'll be satisfied for a while. Maybe they'll stop luring people to that cave. But Derek doesn't think so, because the crawlers are smart, and they've learned that the best way to attract humans is to let one escape, to let stories spread, to let curiosity do the rest. How many unmapped caves are there in the Appalachian Mountains? How many contain things that were never meant to be discovered? Derek doesn't know, but he knows there's at least one, and he knows the crawlers are still down there, still waiting, still hungry. If this story has you reconsidering that spelunking hobby, hit that subscribe button for more terrifying tales from the places humans shouldn't go. And remember, not all caves are safe to explore. Some have been unmapped for a reason. Some contain things that have evolved in isolation, things that see humans as either threats or prey, and some darkness should never be disturbed. The mountains keep their secrets for a reason. Respect those secrets. Stay in the sunlight, and if you ever find a cave that's not on any maps, that locals won't talk about, that has a bad feeling you can't quite explain, walk away. Just walk away. Some discoveries aren't worth making.